Hello and welcome to a very cold Thursday afternoon. On Tuesday afternoon, I set out to do a range test and thought this is going to be a great day. It's about almost 40 degrees. Let's get things tested out. So we got in the car, hit the road, and I didn't realize the incredible amount of wind that was going to be hitting us. I think we had gusts that day up to about 40 miles an hour. And most of it was crosswind, but then coming home, it was pushing against us pretty hard. So it turned out to be not necessarily a long-range test, but a test of can we make it back to the driveway. And because our range was so abysmal, you'll see that here in a minute, it brought up the question of what is worse, wind or cold? So today it's 2 below zero, and we're going to do the same loop we did and see if we end up with the same amount of range, which says there's probably something more to do with the battery, or if the cold is affecting more or less than the wind. Now there is a little bit of wind today, but it's not nearly as intense as it was on Tuesday. So we're going to get in the car and get going here pretty quick, starting at 100%, and then we'll see what we end up with today. And in the meantime, I'll show you what happened on Tuesday. At 100% at 339, we'll call it 340. It took a long time for the pack to balance and finish charging. We're going to get rolling and see how we do. We have got a heck of a crosswind going on here, as I'm sure you'll see when you take a look at the footage and see the flag flying pretty much straight east. So we do have quite a bit of wind. The trucks and things are blowing around a little bit, but I guess that'll kind of make up for some of the warmer temps we're having. The car is still saying it's 39 degrees Fahrenheit, and now that we've been going for a while, our remaining range is 150 miles, it's saying. Obviously considerably less than what's rated. I'm getting the 150 off of our energy graph, so that is based off how we've been driving for the last half hour. To Albert Lee. We've gone about 80 miles. We're still at 53%, 93 miles of range left according to the trip graph. We're going to turn around here in a couple seconds and head back north, see how that crosswind treats us. Alright, down to 51% here, and we actually took the turnoff to go to the Happy Trails Travel Center where the superchargers are, but we are just going to turn around and get right back on the highway. Alright, back on autopilot, and at 75 miles an hour. And I know some people would drive faster or slower than 75, but this is what I've done the other range tests set to, so figured we'd keep it consistent. Although we might have a little more wind pushing against us going north, I think most of it's slightly downhill, headed down toward the river, so hopefully that'll balance each other out. If not, we'll have to slow down. Okay, so that wind I was talking about when we turned around is significantly stronger than I thought, and it is throwing us around as we're trying to drive into it. And we are also dropping range super fast. I just had to check how far away we are from home. We're now about 60 miles away from home, and it's saying we have 62 miles on our energy graph. And I think that's optimistic because it's still showing part of the old trip before we turned around. I'm going to get out of this person's way, and then I'm going to back my speed down and try to find a semi to hunker down behind, because this might be close. And I realize this might fuel some people saying, see, EVs are crap in bad weather. But I do want to point out, on our way headed south, I saw a pickup truck that was on the shoulder in the northbound lane filling up with a gas can because they had run out going into this wind. So I don't think it's just electric vehicle owners who could miscalculate the severity of this wind. Alright, we are 32 miles from our turn. The energy graph is now saying 34 miles, and kind of leveled out as we've gone downhill again a little bit and got in some bluffs with some trees. That's helped. I've also lowered my speed to 71. That's got us kind of neck and neck with where we need to be to get home. Wind is quite intense, even with autopilot on. It's having to make some pretty good adjustments. It's doing great. I would be fighting it if it wasn't. We're just rolling. This is a little shorter trip than what I expected, but this is just another real-world example of what can happen when you just jump on the road and get going. Now, what's cool about this, as frustrating as low as this result is going to be, that is super frustrating. But the positive in it is that for the most part around the country, there are superchargers every 100 to 150 miles. You might have to stop a couple times more than you wanted to, but you can still do this. And that's where Tesla has such an advantage with the supercharger network at this point, where you know there are going to be fast charging options, 99.5% reliable, plenty of stalls, and you know you're going to get a charge. So would it be great to get a lot more range on a day like today? Yes, and in the future that will come. But knowing you'll be able to charge, like we turned around without charging at a charging stop. So had we continued as usual down through Iowa, that could have been just a pit stop we made on our way to Dow's, more stops maybe, but still a doable trip, even in inclement weather. Alright, we are still cutting it close. The car is saying 1.9 miles till our turnoff, and the energy graph is telling us 2 miles. About as close as you'd ever want to cut it. So we'll see how this goes, showing 1%, and we got the dot saying, hey, you're really almost out of energy here. I'm guessing it's going to start slowing us down. So for safety's sake, I'm going to roll the speed down, get a little regen. Okay, luckily I got behind a couple of people going very slow. 58 in a 65, which is super annoying usually, but between that and going downhill, that's helping us quite a bit here on this last mile. The battery is now showing 0%. Alright, we are to our exit. Now it's just a matter of babying it back up the hill to our house. We're at the stop sign. You can see the zeros all along. Just ease it back up the hill. Ooh, there is not a lot of power. You do have to go up a fairly substantial hill here. And we made it! Yay! Yeah! Alright, let's get this thing parked and charging. There we are. 0%. Pretty dicey there at the end. So a pretty abysmal 163 miles, but super windy. And I know from other tests that these tires aren't super efficient either. You can see average energy was almost 400 watt hours per mile. All right, back to Thursday now, and you can see just backing out of the garage dropped us down to 99%. It is 2 below zero. The higher temperature above is from acclimating from the garage temperature to ambient air. And I'm setting up a new trip so we can compare stats a little easier. All right, it is 1:58. We'll call it 2 p.m. and we'll get on the road and get this test rolling. Where we turned around on Tuesday was where the superchargers are in Albert Lea. Assuming we'll do at least as well as we did on Tuesday, we should hit that exit at 50%, meaning we can get all the way back here with our remaining battery. If we're under 50% when we get to Albert Lea, we will stop and charge, because in these temperatures, you do not want to get stranded on the side of the road. All right, that is 75 miles an hour. We're going to keep the cruise on. autopilot on. So I'll check in a little bit later, but for our first point of reference, I want to give you a shot of the flag that we saw at Camping World that was just straight out the other day. And we'll see how it compares shot for shot, and then we'll just continue on the trip. All right, we've been on the road for a little over half an hour here. Our average watt hour per mile is about 450. We keep going up these hills, and we're down to 73%. So really, again, just chewing through the battery. According to the car, all the tires are at 40 PSI. It's a little bit low, but as they warm up, it's a little within fluctuation. I think the make of the tires is causing more of a problem than the PSI probably at this point. Just a couple PSI off of what's recommended. And according to our trip meter, we've gone 38 miles, used 17 kilowatt hours already. We've got about 42 miles left to Albert Lea. So I don't know, it's going to be close. I don't know if we'll make it there with 50%. Maybe this level of cold, maybe 40 degrees is enough of a difference to give us a similar result. That brings up other questions. All right, we just hit 50%, and we are still about 12 miles away from Albert Lea. So, worst result. We'll see what we get when we get there. I am going to supercharge. My plan is to only supercharge 10%. And not preheat, just plug in, get 10%, and take off again. But our average for the last half hour is 471 watt hours per mile, and it's saying we only have 72 miles left. We've gone 69 miles with an average energy consumption of 465 watt hours per mile, and used 32 kilowatts. So could we maybe make it back? Yeah, but in this temperature, I'm not going to chance it. So it's saying Albert Lea in 9 more miles. We're now down to 48%. Just pulled into the supercharger, and just as I was backing in, we hit 40%. Our last 30 miles have averaged 449 watt hours per mile, and we've got 62 miles of range. If we look at that trip, we've only gone 82 miles and used 60% of our battery, according to our percentage graph, 38 kilowatts, which is ridiculous. That's saying 460 watt hours per mile, so we'll see. So we'll wait till this gets back up to 60% and then hit the road. So we got up to 61%, just hit it before I unplugged, so should have plenty to get home. We're gonna get on our way and get back home. And we are off from Albert Lea. Alright, autopilot's back on. I'm gonna navigate home just to keep an eye on what it's thinking we are going to arrive with. It's estimating we'll arrive home with 7%, so we will see if that pans out, and we'll check in later. Here we're at about the 30-minute mark, going north. And you can see our average watt hour per mile from when we got back on the highway is considerably lower at 417. It's still very high, but less than it was. And it's saying we have 67 miles left. And on our trip graph, it's now saying we'll arrive with 9%. So that keeps improving as we continue here. We've just about done 55 miles on our way north here by now. On the wind test, I was already knocking the speed down to about 70 miles an hour, turning down the heat in the car, all that kind of stuff. I've still got the fan going at 70 and in the front and the back. Obviously, having the extra charges helped with that. Our watt hour per mile over the last 30 miles is actually down to 385. And it's saying we've still got 40 miles of range, but as we hit about 23%, I noticed when I checked the trip graph, it was saying we were only going to arrive with 6%, and it had said all the way up to 9 at one point. But by our percentage, we're starting to see the snowflake again. So even driving at 75 miles an hour is not enough to keep the battery from getting cold at these temperatures. So I'm guessing that drop in our estimated arrival percentage is due to the battery cooling down despite us driving. So I'm still not at all worried about getting home with enough, but it's just interesting that this is taking so much more when it seemed like that wind was really doing some damage. I could drop the speed down, but that would probably cool the battery off faster. So gonna keep it at 75. Let's see how this all plays out over the next 30 miles or so. All right, and just like last time, as we're getting near the exit, we are behind a couple slow trucks, so that's slowing us down. We're down to 7% with the blue snowflake showing. The energy graph is saying 12 miles, so definitely a good choice to have stopped at Albert Lee and charged. But we're having a beautiful sunset. We'll get home and find out what our final numbers are. And getting the battery low signal again. 11 miles of range left, and got here with 6%. Let's take a look at the charging. See, we do have a little bit of blue in our battery there. Battery heating with the speeds we were going and not using much, if any, regen. Just wasn't putting any heat back into the battery. If we bring up our cold test here, you can see we got 164 miles, 71 kilowatt hours used, and then 434 watt hours per mile total for the whole trip up and down. Back in the studio, and it turns out I am terrible at predictions. I was dead sure the cold weather test would do better than the wind test. But let's take a look at these numbers, compare them to each other, and then compare that to a couple other long-range and cold weather tests I've done in this car and our older Model S. On the wind test, we ended with a final consumption of 393 watt-hours per mile, covering 163 miles using 64 kilowatt-hours of the 75 kilowatt-hour pack. Our percentage said it had used 100%, but according to our mileage, we only got 50% of the rated range, and that was with slowing down and lowering the heat in the car. In the cold test, we lost most of the wind, but dropped off 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. Our consumption was over 450 watt-hours per mile on the first half of the trip, but settled down to 434 watt-hours per mile by the end. With the extra charge in Albert Lee, I ended up using 115% of the available battery, 71 kilowatt-hours out of the 75 kilowatt-hour pack, meaning we took a 56% range hit to that optimistic best case scenario 326 miles. But I also didn't slow down or lower the cabin temp, so these tests were closer than they appear, maybe only 2 or 3% different. But in these tests, wind seems to have a lower impact than cold, and slowing down or drafting is easier to do in a windy situation than slowing down in the cold and letting your battery get colder. Now, some of this could be my car individually, either my battery or, more likely, I think, my tires. This summer, I did a lower speed rural route range test, which averaged probably 60 miles an hour. And in that test, on an almost windless day, the consumption was much better at 270 watt-hours per mile, and I used 69 kilowatt-hours to go 255 miles. But it was still 22% off the rated range in almost ideal conditions. So more testing needs to be done on this, maybe in our upcoming road trip or this spring with new tires. Finally, I want to compare our Model Y with the 2015 Model S that we had before this. A couple years ago, I did a below zero range test in that car, which had an 85 kilowatt-hour battery pack. With a consumption of 451 watt-hours per mile, I got 143 miles out of the rated 285 EPA. So a 50% range loss there too. But if we compare the cold test on the Model Y and figure how far it would have traveled using only 100%, it gives the same 143 miles out of the battery pack that's 10 kilowatt hours smaller. Bad tires or not, that's a solid improvement in technology over the span of 6 years. So final conclusions, in extreme wind or cold, it's good to keep an eye on that consumption and know how much you're using. We took about 50% losses on this. Also, navigate to destinations so you know what to expect, and use your energy graph and your trip meter to make sure you're on pace. If you're experiencing both wind and extreme cold and snow, you need to watch that like a hawk and expect that you're going to need to stop and charge more often. And remember, all vehicles are dealing with these conditions. It seems more pronounced because EVs are a new technology, but along both of these trips I saw many ICE cars pulled over on the side of the road, either having run out of gas by misjudging their consumption or having broken down from the extreme cold. I'll keep checking on how my range is doing, but for now, thanks for watching. If you found this helpful or interesting, please feel free to like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Or if you have a question, leave it in the comments down below. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day. Stay warm, stay prepared, and I'll catch you in the next one. Good job. There you are. You're just going to keep waving.